What's up, you guys? Void here, coming back at y'all with another Commander deck tech video. As I did before with my Yidris deck tech, I pulled off options to my patrons, and they chose Zedruu the Greathearted. If you're unfamiliar with her, she is a Jeskai colored 2/4 legendary Minotaur monk, with at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of permanents you own that your opponents control. That is really the most important part here. What we want to synergize with are cards that are going to fool around. Either they're going to be giving control of themselves to your opponents, or we're going to have Zedruu do it with her activated ability, which is 3 mana. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. Now that may not seem like a good thing, but there are a lot of terrible things you can give to your opponents, and that is the whole premise for the deck. Now you could also use some sort of group hug strategy, which also works. Not as funny, but it's something you could do. As always, we're going to take a look at our lands first. We have your basic mana fixing in these colors, nothing super special, but we do have a homeward path, which is kind of important. If you're giving your opponent something that you want back, you can always take it back by tapping this. I think that is a pretty good land. And we of course have Rainbow Veil, which is pretty cool. Taps for 1 mana of any color, but when we do that, we give control of it to an opponent at the beginning of the next end step, which is good because it's going to allow us to draw more cards, gain more life with Zedruu. And we also have a Reliquary Tower because this deck is about trying to draw as many cards as we can. We don't want to have to discard any of them. Moving on to our artifacts, we have 14 of them. Soul Ring, the obvious one, but we also play the 3 signets in these colors. I can't really get enough of these. I think they're perfect. They give you mana fixing and they ramp you up. We also have a Howling Mine because this is kind of the illusion of the deck. You want to appear as the helper at the table, so playing cards like Howling Mine, which by the way, giving these to your opponents doesn't really do anything. It's pretty much just going to be Howling Mine. Everyone's still going to be drawing that extra card, but it helps make you appear like less of a target at the table. We have a Jinxed Idol because this is hilarious. Not a huge deal, but it's going to really start to show you what this deck is going to do here. At the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 2 damage to you, but you can sacrifice a creature to have target opponent gain control of it. We're not going to do that. We're just going to use Zedruu's ability and then just give it to someone, and then during their upkeep they're going to be dealt 2 damage. Chances are, depending on the deck that they're playing, they may not want to sacrifice a creature, so Jinxed Idol is perfect. We of course have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. Zedruu is a big part of our deck in why we play her in the first place, so making sure she has Shroud or Hexproof is perfect. We have Thought Vessel for the same reason that we have a Reliquary Tower. Commander Sphere is going to give us whatever mana we need, and it can sacrifice itself to allow us to draw a card. We have Crown of Doom, which this one is disgusting. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Has the activated ability of 2. We can have target player other than Crown of Doom's owner gain control of it. We can only do that during our turn. That is likely what we're going to do. We have of course 1 win con here in Aetherflux Reservoir. May not seem like a big deal, but when you're in a deck where you can gain a lot of life reliably, such as the upkeep trigger with Zedruu, why not play this? You could potentially gain even more life even if you don't use it as a way to knock players out of the game. Then we have Alhamerit's Archive. This is perfect for this deck because that's all that we do. Gain life and draw cards, so why not get twice that much? And then we of course have a Venser's Journal. Gonna gain you even more life equal to the number of cards in your hand during your upkeep, and you have no maximum hand size, so that's a huge bonus there. Then we have 13 creatures. We have Goblin Cadets. When it blocks or becomes blocked, target opponent gains control of it. Pretty simple, straight to the point. It does remove it from combat, so it's no longer going to be destroyed or anything like that, so pretty much no matter what happens in combat, it's going to change control to someone else. It's not a May, so that's pretty cool. Bizarre Trader, this one is really cool in Zedruu. Target player gains control of target artifact, creature, or land you control. The fact that this is just a tap ability, it doesn't cost you any mana, is really efficient, and it allows you to fool around with your creatures, your artifacts, and your lands. Then we have a Gilded Drake. This is yet another cool iconic card. Enters the battlefield and exchanges control with a creature your opponents control. Then we have a Humble Defector. This is another kind of cool illusion-based card where you want to appear as the nice guy at the table, so giving your opponents a creature that can tap for card draw is pretty sweet, but also counts towards Zedruu's upkeep. Then we have a Steel Golem. This is another really nasty one. You can't play creature spells, so giving this to an opponent who's playing something like Animar, they're really screwed. They can't play anything, especially if you're running into those decks that play Primal Surge and all they want to do is just go off with their creatures. They don't really care about non-creature spells, or maybe even giving this to a Rurik Thar deck. Really powerful. Vidalcan Plotter. This one is pretty simple, but just the fact that you have something this early on that can count towards Zedruu's upkeep, you're just going to be exchanging control of a land. Doesn't really make you a target, doesn't have to, and you already get that advantage there earlier on. Then we have an Acroan Horse. An opponent gains control of it when it enters the battlefield, so really efficient there. And at the beginning of their upkeep, each opponent is going to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, so really cool, awesome in group hug, even better in this deck. Then we have a Gold Knight Castigator. This one is fantastic. At first glance, it appears really cool. 4/9 flyer with haste for just 4 mana, but if a source would deal damage to you, it deals double that damage to you instead. And if a source would deal damage to Gold Knight Castigator, it deals double that damage to it instead. So hopefully it doesn't leave the battlefield. It is an easy blocker, I know that, but the fact that you can make an opponent, at least for one turn, make it to where each opponent who wants to hate them out of the game, they have the way of dealing double damage to them, at least for one combat. Then we have a Grid Monitor. This is pretty much the same exact thing as Steel Golem. Your opponents can't play creature spells when you give control of it to them. Really sweet. Then we have a Rust Elemental. This one is going to hurt them. At the beginning of their upkeep, they have to sacrifice an artifact other than Rust Elemental, and if they can't do that, it taps and then they lose 4 life. Really helps to keep the pressure on them. Then we have a Chrome Shell Crab. One of those morph creatures, you can play it for 3 and then morph it for 5. And then when it's turned face up, you get to exchange control of target creature you control and target creature an opponent controls. We have a Perplexing Chimera. It's kind of the same thing but for spells and a lot more intimidating. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you can exchange control of Perplexing Chimera and that spell, and then you get to choose new targets, so really sweet. And then we have a Psychosis Crawler. Not necessarily a win con, but definitely a way that we can be on the offensive. We're going to be drawing a bunch of cards with Zedruu, so hopefully we can have our opponents lose a bunch of life off of that. We do have one Planeswalker in the form of Venser the Sojourner, mainly in here because his plus is going to give us control back of permanents we give to our opponents, because that's just how the exile thing works. Other than that though, if we are able to get to his ult, that is a pretty sweet one. We can just start exiling permanents. Then we have 18 enchantments. We have Curse of Opulence. The cool thing about curses is that you can just give control of it to someone else and it doesn't really matter. Kind of like Howling Mine, it's still going to do the same exact thing because the target is always going to be that player that you have it enchant. So you could even give it to them and it's not going to change. Really sweet. Then we have Celestial Dawn. This one is a little bit tricky, but hopefully you have the mana rocks to make this work. Lands you control are planes, so that's the main reason why. Non-land cards you own that aren't in play, spells you control, and non-land permanents you control are white. You may spend white mana as though it were mana of any color, and you may spend other mana only as though it were colorless mana. So it really fools around with what your opponents are doing. Then we have a Detention Sphere. We also have an Oblivion Ring. Kind of the same deal. Giving control of these to someone else doesn't really change what happened to them because it's still going to be exiling that permanent that you wanted to exile. So yet another cool thing that you can just give to an opponent. Then we have Ghostly Prison and Propaganda. Basically the same card, but we are likely going to be a target at some point in the game and we don't have the best creature presence. Then we have a Paradox Haze. This is one of the essential cards in the deck. We likely want to do this on ourselves at the beginning of our upkeep. We're going to get an additional upkeep after that one. Whatever we get off of Zedruu, we're going to get off of it again. It's just going to help us get more advantage. Really sweet. We could also do this on an opponent if they have a deadly upkeep trigger, so just keep that in mind. Then we have a Pyromancer Swath. This is another cool one. If an instant or sorcery you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals that much damage +2. That really doesn't matter because no one really plays burn. They might play some burn, but hopefully they don't. At the beginning of each end step, you have to discard your hand, so giving this to an opponent is really sweet. Rhystic Study is just good for us. It's good card draw. Helps tax our opponents at the very least. And then we have a Solitary Confinement. This one is really good with Zedruu because during our upkeep with her, we can just start drawing more cards, and it really doesn't matter if we have to discard as a cost, but we do end up skipping our draw steps, so that's really why it's in here with Zedruu. Then we have a Wild Research. This is really good utility in this deck. We have a way on an activated ability to search up an enchantment, and we also have a way to search up an instant. The only downside is that we do have to end up discarding a card at random, so it's not guaranteed tutoring, but still pretty sweet. Then we have an Aggressive Mining. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. You can't play lands, but you have an activated ability where you can sacrifice a land and then draw 2 cards. So hopefully whoever you did this to, they're really low on lands and it's not going to really help them that much, and they're just begging to draw into whatever enchantment removal they have, because that's really the only way they can get around this. Either that or your opponents are feeling generous and they want to help them out. And then we have Illusions of Grandeur. As a cumulative upkeep, so you have to pay 2 mana each one of your upkeeps, and that's just going to keep adding up. So you're following one, you're going to have to pay 4. Really crazy. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 20 life, but when it leaves, you lose 20 life. So you're going to gain 20 life, you're going to give this to an opponent, they can't keep paying that 4, 6, whatever, which chances are they're not going to. They're going to end up losing a whopping 20 life. Really disgusting. And then we have a Puka's Mischief. This one is really sweet. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to exchange control of target non-land permanent we control with the target non-land permanent and opponent controls with equal or lesser converted mana cost. Really adds to what we want to do with the deck, exchanging control of permanents. Hopefully we can use this, fool around with it, and get something we want. And then we have Statecraft. This one is really cool, really defensive. It prevents all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by creatures you control. So giving this to an opponent means that their creatures are useless. They can block really well. Combat damage isn't going to be dealt to them, but if they have a huge creature presence and the whole purpose of their deck is to swing, be super aggressive, this is a perfect card to stop them. And then we have a Thought Lash. Really disgusting artwork there, but as a cumulative upkeep yet again, we exile the top card of our library, so that's going to keep adding up. Hopefully they have to start exiling a lot of cards off of that. But when Thought Lash's cumulative upkeep isn't paid, you exile all cards from your library. So your opponents have to keep doing that. The only upside to this card is that you can exile the top card of your library to prevent the next 1 damage that would be dealt to you. It is also a defensive card for them, but likely that's not going to really matter too much because they're just going to keep exiling cards off the top of their library. Really crazy. And then we have an Assemble the Legion. Really awesome defensive card. The whole purpose of this is to just let it sit on the field. It's going to keep adding up. You're going to get more of those soldiers, and hopefully you can start swinging with them. And then our last enchantment is Form of the Dragon. At the beginning of your upkeep, it's going to deal 5 damage to target creature or player, but at the end of each turn, your life total becomes 5, and creatures without flying can't attack you. It's kind of like a moat. You have these upsides, it's going to deal 5 damage, but it's also going to make you super susceptible to any sort of burn spells, any sort of flyers, anything that's going to be able to deal that 5 damage easily. So it's really a way that you can hate a player out of the game. And then after that, we move on to our 14 sorceries. We have Donate, and we also have a Harmless Offering. These two are basically the same card. One's red and one is blue. You're going to give an opponent control of one of your permanents. That's the whole purpose. Then we have Political Trickery, kind of like the Vidalcan that I mentioned earlier, where you can just exchange control of a land. That's pretty much what this does, and it's really easy to get that, have that add up to your upkeep with Zedruu. Then we have a Disrupt Decorum, because we want our opponents to fight each other, and we really like this card. A Rite of Replication is really disgusting at the right situation. There's so many creatures where getting 5 copies of them is perfect and ideal, and so many creatures have ETB triggers that are easy to take advantage of, and a lot of good commanders have awesome death triggers. And then we have a Supreme Verdict and a Wrath of God, because sometimes we're going to get overwhelmed. Never really hurts to have these. Fractured Identity is an awesome card to fool around with. Even if it's something as simple as a Howling Mine, each opponent is going to get a Howling Mine, and then everyone's going to be drawing even more cards. But it's also a funny card if you just have any of those disgusting ones, like Illusions of Grandeur, Aggressive Mining. Giving those to each of your opponents is fantastic. And then we have an Austere Command, gives us even more flexible removal. Different permanent types we can get rid of. Fantastic. Then we have a Cultural Exchange. This is awesome because it's permanent. You choose any number of creatures target player controls, and then you choose that same number that another player controls, and then they exchange those. So it doesn't even have to be your creatures, even though that's a cool thing to do. If you have a lot of those deadly creatures that you can give to your opponents, I mean, why not? But Cultural Exchange is really sweet if you just want to fool around with your opponents, give each other really powerful creatures, and make it harder for them to go off with their strategies. And then we have an Approach of the Second Sun, because we do need a way to win the game, and the good thing about this deck is that Zedruu is capable of giving us a bunch of card draw, so the chances of us getting to the 7th card in our library, or 7th from the top, is a lot easier. Then we have one of the deadliest, if not the most funniest card, and that is Thieves' Auction. Really a pain in the ass, I know that, but you cannot deny the potential with Zedruu for this to get out of hand. All you have to do is Thieves' Auction and then play Zedruu, and likely you're going to be gaining a whole bunch of life and a bunch of card draw. We have Insurrection. This is more or less a win con. We don't really care that much about synergizing with anything else, but this is the type of control deck where you need to have like 1 card win cons, and in the right situation, this is going to win you the game. We have a Blasphemous Act because it's one of the best red spells in the format. Insane cost reduction and 13 damage to each creature is going to make it real easy to get out of tough situations. And then we finish up the deck tech with our 2 instants, which are Swords to Plowshares and Cyclonic Rift. Can't really beat these two. These two are awesome staples within their colors. So anyway, guys, that's going to about do it for this Commander deck tech for Zedruu the Greathearted. Really weird deck, really unique, kind of like a lot of the other unique ones like Nekasar, where they just have a weird strategy that doesn't really seem to fit well or conform to what we know the game to be. I mean, the whole idea of just giving your opponents your stuff isn't really something we see in a lot of other decks. But anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this deck tech. Feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments section below. As always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.